tonight begins the vigil for the Cinnante of Our Lady of Mount Carmel for us Carmelites. And as I mentioned yesterday, kind of the history of the beginnings of the order on Mount Carmel in Israel, where the early Carmelites dedicated themselves to our Blessed Virgin Mother, and then from going to Europe living into the mendicant lifestyle of preaching and teaching and kind of going from place to place, from living this kind of contemplative spiritual life, and now also a very active ministry as well. And of course, Our Lady once again promised her protection to the order by giving the scaffold to St. Simon Stock, reminding him that whoever died clothed in Carmelite habit shall not suffer eternal fire. It was a promise of salvation. So we see in the scapular, this is a tangible sign of Mary's love for us, her mantle of protection over us, clothing us in the virtues that ultimately come from the heart of her Son Jesus. And yesterday I shared the first miracle story that I encountered as a young seminarian when that elderly man gave the scapular that I gave him to a soldier in Iraq who literally survived an explosion and was spared death. So now the second miracle story I'm going to tell you of the scapular happened a couple of years after that, more than a couple of years after that. I was already ordained priest for about 8 years, and I was helping out in a high school in upstate New York. I just entered the Carmelite order from being a Latin priest, and now I'm ministering upstate where another house is in Middletown, New York. We have a beautiful shrine to Our Lady of Mount Carmel there in Middletown. And I was living in the parish across the street, the parish, of course, of the Mount Carmel, and helping out with this high school. So I was asked to give a retreat for the students there. It was kind of a senior retreat. It was a Saturday during the day. And I don't know why they picked a Saturday during the day, because I'm sure many high school students would rather be somewhere else than at school going on a retreat on a Saturday, during the day. Anyway, so I had the challenge of teaching, preaching to these high school students for their senior retreat. And every time I give a retreat, every time I give a conference or a talk or a mission, I always like to dedicate one talk to Our Lady, about Our Lady. So usually whatever the topic is, if it's a Lenten mission, a mission, I can talk about whatever the topics are. But I'd always like to make one dedicated talk to the Blessed Mother, and about, kind of encouraging devotion to her. So it was the end of the retreat day, and we're coming to the close of the day. There are different talks and different activities. And I decided to, again, give a conference about devotion to Our Lady. And I shared with them the story of this soldier who survived that explosion in Iraq through the brown scapular. So at the end of the conference, I encouraged all of them to wear the scapular, and I blessed scapulars, and I rolled them in the brown scapular. Well, the retreat was over, and I would go to the school once a week. I wasn't assigned there full time. I was kind of one day a week for Mass and confessions. So the following Wednesday, after that retreat, I meet the campus minister, and he says to me, "Father, something horrible happened. Something wonderful happened." I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, there was a young boy, a senior. He just got his license, and after he was involved with scapular, he went home, and he just got his license, and he was driving upstate, these kind of dark roads and winding roads, and it was kind of getting to be dusk a little bit, and he was going through these winding roads, and all of a sudden a deer jumped in front of his car, and he got nervous, so he wanted to avoid hitting the deer, but instead he went off the road, down a ditch. The car turned over several times, totally, in this ditch. And one of his friends, who I found out later on, was his classmate, blew off the retreat because he was an atheist, but he was a volunteer, a firefighter. So he was called to this accident, and he sees his friend's car off the road, down this ditch, and he said to himself, he never saw anyone survive a car accident like that. So they go down the ditch, and they're expecting the worst, and they're able to pull this young man out of the car, totally safe, not a scratch on him. And the boy was convinced that it was the Blessed Mother Mary and her scapular that saved him from this accident. So now I hear the story, I go talk to the boy, and in the hallway, not realizing that his buddy with the atheist right behind him, you know. And I said to him, so tell me what happened. He told me the story. He said, Father, I should be dead right now. I know the Blessed Mother saved me. I said, well, obviously, you know, the Blessed Mother has great plans for you and for your life, and her protection is very powerful. Now, the young boy who was an atheist overheard the conversation, and he kind of walked in and said, oh, what are you going to become a priest now that you saved this accident? So I went right into his face. I said, why, what's wrong with being a priest? And he said, nothing. He said, you want to be a priest? I know he was an atheist. You want to be a priest? No. I said, why not? He said, I'm too weak to be a priest. So usually God calls the weak and you know, confound them and learn the wise words. Anyway, long story short, that boy, towards the end of the year, I found out the atheist was going to enlist the Marines. And remember, he blew off the retreat, so he never got a scapular. So towards the end of the school year, I go up to him and I said, oh, I heard you were in the Marines. And now this boy, I can tell you, always looked very depressed to me, kind of sad. There was always kind of a darkness in his eyes. There was really no joy, no happiness. And kind of an oppressive spirit. I could kind of see it and sense it. So I heard he was going to the Marines. So I said to him, I heard you were in the Marines, so here's a brown scapular. You know, I gave it out the retreat that you didn't come to the beginning of the year, but I want you to have it. And he said, well, Father, I don't believe in that stuff. I said, you don't believe in that stuff? I said, what about your friend who survived the car accident? Oh yeah, that got me thinking. That got you thinking. And I said, you better take the scapular and you better wear it. So he kind of took it, you know, and I didn't know if he was going to wear it or not. Anyway, about a year later, I go to, I'm back at the school now, and the Marines would come regularly to kind of recruit the students. So I see this young Marine walking down the hallway, you know, uniform on, good shape, smiling. It was the kid, looked totally different. Totally different. I didn't recognize him. He's waving. I was like, who's this Marine waving at me? And then getting closer, I realized I didn't recognize his face. And he looked happy, he looked joyful, he was in, you know, good health and everything. And he said, Father, don't you recognize me? I said, oh, I said, good to see you. I said, how you doing? He said, I'm doing great. I said, yeah, you're doing great. He said, yeah, I'm wearing that scapular you gave me. I went back to confession. I started going to Mass. I'm loving life. I'm doing great. Now, to me, that's the real miracle of the scapular, you know. Yes, that young boy was surviving the accident there. And by the way, just on the side, after this happened, that kind of went around the school. And there was a guidance counselor in the school who was Jewish. She worked for the state, and she was working in counseling. Anyway, she was Jewish, but she heard about the story, so she cut a scapular and she put it over the mirror in her car. And then a couple months later, during the winter months, she has a beautiful red sports car, and I guess she was going a little too fast, and she hit black ice, and she was total control of the car, and she said she was going to die. And all she did is drew the wind, grabbed the scapular, and she swears by it. The car miraculously stopped. And she was convinced the Blessed Mother saved her. It's a Jewish woman, okay? So Mary's a Jewish woman. She takes care of everyone, right? So the scapular is very powerful. It's a powerful sign of Mary's protection and the protection over us. There's a beautiful story at our shrine in Middletown. Before it was a shrine, it was a high school seminary, and there was a section where the dormitories were, and there was a school building where the classes were. And at one point, the kitchen set a fire to the building, and the whole school was going up in smokes. But before this one priest left, he took a scapular and he just hooked it onto the wall. So I guess there was a building where the kitchen was, and then part of the building, the other part was where the dormitories were. He hooked the scapular on the wall, and don't you know, right at that moment where the scapular was, the fire stopped. So Our Lady's promise to save us from the fires of hell. She literally saved the part of the building from being burnt, you know. So I share these stories with you because, again, this is not a good luck charm, but it's symbolic of Our Lady's mantle of protection over us. As I mentioned, every morning when I wake up, I put on my habit. What am I saying? Mary, I am in your service. I'm dedicating my life to you to serve you and your son, Jesus. And that's what the scapular is. So tomorrow we're going to have the opportunity to be enrolled in the brown scapular. If you haven't been enrolled before, or you can remove that enrollment. receive the scapulars as well after the Mass. We will join the Mass, and after the Mass, we'll have a little rosary procession with the statue of Our Lady. So I really encourage you to come tomorrow. But what are the conditions of the scapular? It's to wear the scapular or the scapular medal always. And Pope St. Pius X gave permission for the scapular medal, especially hot weather, if people have allergies with the wool and whatnot. So to wear the scapular always, to observe chastity according to your state of life. That means living in God's grace regularly. We all called to be chaste according to our state of life, to have a pure heart before God, and to have a sinless heart. This is why we should avail ourselves regularly of the sacraments of reconciliation and, of course, the Holy Eucharist. And then, of course, to do some kind of daily devotion to Our Lady. The Holy Rosary is an encouragement to do that every day. If not the Holy Rosary, the Little Office of Blessed Virgin Mary, or some type of daily Marian devotion. So those are the kind of conditions to be a member of the confraternity of the scapular. So observe chastity in your life, meaning going to sacraments regularly, avail yourself of the sacraments, to choose some type of daily devotion to Our Lady, whether it's the Rosary, or the Office of Blessed Virgin Mary, or the deck of the Rosary, just some type of Marian devotion every day, and to wear the scapular and the scapular medal always. And if you observe those things, guess what? You're not going to be touched by the fires of hell, right? This is the promise of salvation. So this is why I encourage all of you to wear the scapular medal, to have some type of daily devotion to Our Lady, and to, of course, live in God's grace. And by doing these things, we go to heaven, and we get to experience the heaven on earth. I encourage you to give scapulars out regularly to the sick, to those who are dying especially, even non-Catholics. You don't have to be Catholic to wear the scapular. A Jewish woman was saved from the Carm accident by grabbing the scapular. So it's a beautiful sign of Mary's mantle of protection. Ultimately, that's what we believe through these sacramentals. God could transmit some type of grace, ultimately for someone's conversion, for someone's healing. Right? That's what our Blessed Mother desires. She desires all of us to know and to love her Son Jesus. And these tangible things she gives us, you know. The Lord works through ordinary means, right? As I mentioned yesterday, the reason why people started wearing the scapular is because so many miracles happened with the friar scapulars. They would pray over the sick, you know, they'd be healed. The dead would even be raised, you know, and people would start cutting pieces of the friar scapulars and wear it around their neck, you know, to have the same type of protection, symbolism of Mary's mantle. That's why we have miniature versions for everyone else to wear as a sign of dedication and consecration to her. So as we continue to celebrate this night and to tomorrow, the beautiful feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, let us ask for powerful intercession. Let us ask for her presence to be really felt here, not only in this church, but in this parish. You know, St. John Vianney, every evening, the Blessed Mother would visit ours. Every evening, she would appear. Now, you don't think of ours as a place like Lourdes or Fatima or Medjugorje, right? But every evening, Mary would appear to John Vianney in ours. And there's a beautiful thing about that, her presence. You know, I think of the story of St. John Bosco. Right before he died, he started the Salesian order. He called, you know, all the members, the priests, the brothers, the sisters, the children that he took care of. And right before he died, he wanted to kind of give them a last will and testament, you know, just to kind of speak to them one last time. And because he was elderly and there was a big kind of area like this, they didn't have microphones like we have now. So his voice was very weak. His voice was very soft. So his priest secretary had to kind of translate to the crowd what Don Bosco wanted to impart to them before he died. So at one point in the middle of his kind of talk to the people, he said, kind of fell into a trance. He had many mystical experiences, dreams, he called them. And he said at one point, Our Lady is here. And the priest, just being human, said, translated as, Don Bosco wants to remind us that Our Lady will always be with the Salesian community. Once again, now Apostle wants to remind us that very humble Christians will always be with our order. And then he got more feisty, started banging on the wheelchair. No, you don't get it. She's here. She's here. She's walking in the corridors of the school. She's in the kitchen. She's in the chapel. She's on the playing fields. She is here. I'd like to suggest every time you and I wear scapular, or pray a rosary, or venerate her image, she's here. She's here. In these days of prayer, she's here with us in a very special way when we talk. And we're going to ask that her presence stays here. It's tangibly felt here, in this church in particular, that people will know her presence. Especially tomorrow, after the Mass, we're going to bring her out into the streets so people could see her. Yes, there's an image of her. But I want to tell you another story. There's a beautiful saint, Canadian saint. She founded the Sisters of Notre Dame. Her name is Marguerite Bourgeois. Marguerite was a school teacher, and she was from, Canada, in Montreal. And one day, she was walking home from school, and there was a procession of people, a confraternity of some sort, was carrying the image of Our Lady through the streets. They had like a little rosary procession. And all of a sudden, as they were passing by this little street Marguerite was walking on, she had to kind of just fall into the doorway of a house so that the people could pass by. But as the statue of Our Lady passed by, Mary appeared to Marguerite and said to her, I want you to educate my children in the faith. That encounter that she had during that procession, randomly coming by the street, caused her to give her life totally to Christ. She became the foundress of the religious community of women dedicated to the Blessed Virgin Mary, educating young children in the faith. That was the shift in her conversion experience, in her relationship with God and the church and Our Lady. She gave her whole life. So you never know. You may think we're just walking around the area praying the rosary. You never know what soul is going to be touched by looking at Our Lady's image. What conversion is going to take place. What vocation is going to be born. What evil is going to flee. What blessing is going to come upon this emperor. This is why we do processions, right? Because they're public manifestations, public professions of our faith and devotion. So as we prepare for that tomorrow, I want you to start praying for that tonight, that Our Lady will touch many, many souls, that her presence will be felt in a very special way tomorrow on our feast day, that many will have an encounter with Our Lady and ultimately with her Son Jesus, so they will know that they're loved. That's Mary's whole purpose, right? Is to point to Jesus. What was the last words that she spoke in the gospel? Do whatever He tells you. Do whatever He tells you. That's her whole purpose, is to bring us closer to the Son Jesus. And that's why we honor her these days during the Triduum, asking her special grace for us, for our families, for the sick, the suffering, for peace throughout the world. I know you all know the story of the priest that survived the atomic bomb at Hiroshima. They prayed the rosary every day. They lived the final message of prayer and sacrifice. You know, the last battle we hear, and the scripture tells us, is Armageddon, You know what Armageddon is? The base of Mount Carmel. That's why Mary last Aboriginal founder, she came as Our Lady of Carmel to make that connection. So the last battle is at the base of Mount Carmel in a place called Armageddon. She's the general in the army. She's the one who's leading us to victory. That beautiful title, Our Lady of Victory, right? It's through the rosary. That's where the title came from. Pope Pius V, when the Muslims were going to take over Europe and wipe out Christianity, he asked everyone to pray the rosary. Right? That's where victory comes from, where the rosary comes from. So anytime we are in need, we seek the Carmelite order. Anytime the order was in need, Mary came to our rescue, giving us the brown scapular. Anytime we are in need, we can have recourse to the mother. But I like to say, the final message is both the rosary and the scapular. You can't have one without the other. You know, Sister Lucia said that when we wear the scapular, it's a concrete sign of consecration to the Immaculate